Hi, I'm Marilyn Van Ostrom, and I'm the chairman of the SafeChurch Committee. You're watching this video in order to complete our church's requirements for our protection policy in order to work with youth and children in our church. During this video, I'm going to walk you through items that you need to look at and priorities on our protection policy. It's your responsibility, once you view this video, to read the policy and also sign off at the end that you have watched the video and read the policy. It's my prayer as we go through this protection policy in this tutorial that God will show us what He needs to teach us about safety and our children, and also to give us wisdom and cover all of this with grace. I'd like to start by sharing why SafeChurch policies are so important, and in doing that I want to read a couple of verses that the SafeChurch Policy Committee has chosen to base our work on. First of all, from Matthew 18:1-6, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a little child whom he placed among them, and he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes a humble place, becoming like this child, is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." And he added, "If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them if a large millstone were hung around their neck and they were drowned in the depths of the sea." And then Ezekiel 34:28, "They will live in safety and no one will make them afraid." Having safe church or protection policies in place shows us that we value one another, especially the children and most vulnerable among us. Policies create a nurturing environment to worship and to grow in faith, while minimizing the risk of abuse or false allegations of abuse. The Safe Church Committee has 5 main purposes, and I want to share those with you as it relates to what we're doing today. The first is policy. So there needs to be a written policy that equips the church in order to protect our children, youth, and those most vulnerable among us. This policy has to provide for adequate screening, annual training, accountability, and regular review. So that's what this educational piece is about. We are also asked to educate, so provide age-appropriate education to our teachers and children. Response is the third, so we need to have protocols and procedures in place, and they are in place in our policy. Awareness is the fourth, and then 5 is commitment. I'm going to briefly walk through the protection policy and highlight things that I want to make sure that you've read or noted as you look at the policy. The purpose of this policy, as I've said, is to keep our children safe and to reduce the possibility of false allegations. It's also a requirement for us to have our liability insurance. So it's a twofold reason. This policy applies to every activity sponsored by Sunnyside Christian Reformed Church that involves youth or children. The first section has some definitions that relate to Washington state law. If you're not familiar with those definitions of what is child abuse or neglect, make sure that you read that. Also, we've got some definitions about misconduct, and so we're not just talking in this policy about abuse and neglect. We're also talking about acting in a way that is moral and biblically correct as we relate to one another. On page 2 of the policy, it talks about general protection policy. Those items apply to every area in the policy. So one of them that we worked on was that any person in a leadership role, including employees, should be a professing member of our church for 6 months. And those are for leadership positions. If you're in a volunteer position, you need to be either a member or regularly attending Sunday morning worship services. The next section, D, talks about our screening policy and procedure. So anyone who works with children or youth needs to have a background check done, and you can easily do that on the church website by clicking on forms, and then the first thing that pops up is background check. Once you complete that background check, it's going to automatically do that annually, so that's a one-time process. Moving on, it talks about reporting policy and procedure. So some people are going to be mandated reporters by what they do for a job. For example, as a nurse, I'm a mandated reporter. Teachers are mandated reporters. Church staff, volunteers, and pastors are not specifically mentioned in the state law about mandated reporters, meaning if I see child abuse or neglect or suspect it, I'm mandated by law to report that within 48 hours to CPS, Child Protective Services. Although church staff and volunteers and pastors are not specifically mentioned, case studies have included them. So we need to assume that we would be included in this law. If there's anything that comes to your attention, or if a child tells you something that makes you wonder, what I expect you to do is to talk with the leader of the ministry that you work with, and talk with myself or one of the other members of the SafeChurch committee. And in the policy, my phone number, the way you can reach me, is available. The other members of the SafeChurch committee are Jamie Tobin and Dave Van Dyke. So we are required to report any allegations of misconduct or abuse to the SafeChurch committee chairman. On the church website, there are forms that we document any allegations of abuse or neglect, and the SafeChurch committee would help you complete that document. The other thing I want to highlight in this area is that one of the things we changed in the policy and how we do things in relationship to SafeChurch is that if there is any allegation of abuse or neglect, the SafeChurch committee will appoint a wise and experienced liaison to minister with compassion to those involved in the allegation, meaning the victim and their family. The administrative council will also appoint someone to work with the person who allegedly committed the abuse if that person is an attender of our church. The SafeChurch committee is going to work with the victim administrative council, will appoint the person for the alleged abuser. The next section has some general guidelines, and what I want you to focus on there is number 4, where it talks about appropriate displays of affection. So remembering that a side hug is appropriate, a pat with an open hand, but not a full body hug when we deal with children. Back rubs and kisses are inappropriate, so making sure that we follow that policy. If you have any questions about that, please contact me. There's also a section in the back, the first appendix is helpful phone numbers and how to report. So I've included the number for Child Protective Services, for Adult Protective Services, and then all of the local police departments. So you will have those available to you. As you move through the policy after that, it goes by specific ministries. So in this section, I'd like you to refer to the policy that reflects the ministry area or age group that you deal with. There's nursery, and that applies to any group that uses our nursery facility. And then there's guidelines next for preschool, kindergarten, church school, children in worship, children's church, and Little Lambs, which is part of our coffee break. One of the things that I want to highlight for each of these is if you are a teacher or a volunteer, you are expected to be there 15 minutes before the starting time and be prepared for the children's arrival. and then stay till the last child has left your care. As you start to go through these policies, there are 2 permission forms that I refer to. The first thing is an annual permission form. So if you are a leader or you have a child in any of the activities in our church, we now have an annual permission form that applies to all activities, all groups in our church. So whether your child is in GEMS, cadets, saltines, the annual permission form must be completed. If you are a leader, you need to assure that that's done by each of the youth attending your group. And then there's a single event permission form, and this is for off-site events. So anytime you leave the church property, then a single event permission form must be completed, and that also is available online. Some of you may be watching this because you are a Sunday school teacher, and so one of the things that falls under the Safe Church Committee is also the Circle of Grace curriculum. So if you have any questions about that, please ask Marenta Prinz or myself about that. Another thing I want to cover is leadership responsibility. So it is the responsibility of ministry leads to give the names of teachers and volunteers who are working in their program to Chad, who is our administrative pastor. And then he will check to make sure everyone has completed the background check and then also read the protection policy. And then the final thing I want to cover is that in order for our protection policy to work, it needs to be that we are respectful and have professional conduct with each other. So one of the things I'm asking is that if you see things happening that make you wonder if someone's following the policy, I would ask that you go to that person, use the Matthew 18 principle, and say, hey, I noticed that this happened. Remember, our protection policy states that we need to do it this way. This policy is only going to work if we support each other and hold each other accountable. We don't want the policy to only go into effect when something has happened. This policy is going to help us prevent things from happening by observing behavior and when things aren't following the policy. Following the policy also protects you. So it protects you from false allegations if you follow this policy, meaning there will be a second person in the room with you. The door will be open, following things that are for your safety and protection. If you have any questions, please contact me. You can email me. My email address is in the policy. My phone number is also there, so you can contact me by phone, call, or text. And thank you so much for doing your part to protect our children.